Left-wing journalist Owen has made headlines today, literally, and is trending on many social media platforms by announcing that he's leaving the Labour Party after 24 years.
I've always been a Labour guy. My family's been Labour for generations. I joined the party at the age of 15 and I voted for them under every single leader in the 21 years of my adult life. But for me, the party's over and I've just quit. And now I think it's time for us to vote Green or Independent, unless you've still got a Labour MP who offers an actual alternative to the catastrophic Tory policies which have brought this country to the edge of ruin. The Tories are toast. You can send Labour a message without risking them sneaking back in. Now, they'll try and spook you into thinking, despite the Tories having comprehensively nuked themselves, you've got to vote Labour or you'll just let the Tories back in. Don't believe them. They're just after a big majority, so they've got absolute power and they can do anything they want and no one can stop them. You can't trust them with that power. Look how they keep purging their opponents, boasting of blackmailing the Speaker of the House of Commons to overturn parliamentary protocols to get their own way. Look, personally, I'm scared of what they'll do with the power that a whopping big majority will give them. If we don't get our act together, when it all ends in tears for Starmer's Labour, and when they're in government, believe me, it will. The far right will be waiting in the wings instead. The Tories are toast. We deserve better. End the war on hope. Send Labour a message. Let's do this.
Right, so didn't want to just give Owen a free advert for his campaign. We have actually asked him some pretty hard-hitting questions when earlier today I caught up with him about this new campaign, We Deserve Better.
For a long time, I've been thinking of ending the increasingly toxic relationship I have with the Labour Party. But I spoke to various people and they thought if I was going to leave, then I might as well do something with it. And lots of them were thinking about the idea of, how do you build pressure on the Labour Party in the electoral system that we have, given the pressure that's coming on it, which it very willingly embraces, is pressure from the right. And what came up in those conversations is, why not something which raises money for independent candidates, Green Party candidates, as well as, if they'll take the money or allowed to take the money without being kicked out of the Labour Party, Labour candidates who still stand for things like taxing the rich to invest in public services, public ownership, and not slaughtering thousands of innocent people in Palestine. And from that came the idea of We Deserve Better. So it's not my campaign. I'm not a leader. I can barely tie my shoelaces. That's probably not a good idea. But that's bringing together lots of activists from across the movement, including councillors who've left the Labour Party, peace activists, climate activists. So, for example, Brilliant Fatima from A Green New Deal Rising is involved. They're already doing their own strategising to raise money and resources for candidates like Jamie Driscoll in the North East, a former Labour current mayor who Labour banned from standing for the new North East Combined Authority. And the idea of it is, at the moment, people think, look, not happy about Labour, but what do we do now? And this is trying to say, look, there are Green candidates who stand for things like public ownership, taxing the rich, taking on the climate emergency. There are independent candidates organically coming out of communities, and there are still good people on the Labour Party. You don't have to choose.
You've spoken a bit today. Actually, I'll ask you a different question first. What was your red line when it came to your lifelong support of Labour and deciding to leave the party?
Israel's genocide in Gaza, no question. What that did is turn what I think is a Labour leadership, which got there through dishonesty. Keir Starmer clearly made a series of extremely dishonest commitments, from public ownership to taxing the rich, investing in public services, scrapping tuition fees. We really could go on. It's quite a long list. In order to, accept things like continuity austerity, slash and burn cuts, which have led this country to disaster, as well as, take child poverty, for example. New Labour had policies on tackling the crisis of child poverty. It wasn't enough, but the minimum wage was something, tax credits were something. These people support the two-child benefit cap, which drives 250,000 kids into poverty and 850,000 children further into poverty. So they don't even have that compared to Blue Labour. That's bad enough. But what takes what I think is a disgrace on domestic policy into abject moral disgrace is the fact at the very beginning, Keir Starmer said he supported the right of Israel to cut off water and energy to a civilian population, then sent shadow ministers on television to back that morally depraved position. And I think that position is sick, by the way. He's a human rights lawyer who understands the Geneva Convention. He knows what Article 33 says on collective punishment. I told Emily Thornby, my local MP at the time, that I wasn't going to vote for her. That was back in October, so clearly I've been thinking about this for a while. I wouldn't be able to do that. I think war crimes, collective supporting what at the beginning was clear from the genocidal statements of Israeli leaders. I called them genocidal on the 9th of October, 2 days after this horror began. I think it was very clear what was going to happen. I don't think I'm a prophet. I don't think I had extreme special insight. I just listened to what Israeli leaders said, and they followed to the letter what they said they were going to do. Labour backed that. They legitimised it, and they're unfit for office. Of course, I can't support something like that. I think it would be, grotesque.
You said you're not in charge of this new campaign, but do you know if there's going to be any similar red lines in the politicians that will be allocated funds from this war chest? For example, independents like George Galloway, very pro-Palestine, preaches an economically redistributive agenda, but also on the flip side, use like an extensive amount of transphobic language in the campaign materials he was giving out. Like, where are the red lines going to be when we're dealing with these new independent candidates, some of who really mix up what political ideologies they follow?
It's not just transphobia, the part of George Galloway, is it? It's on a whole range of issues. I mean, talking about refugees being men of fighting age, his language around grooming gangs. When he attacked the Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf, in a tweet, he said, "You're not Scottish like me, you're not Celtic like me." What are you supposed to do with that kind of language? He claims the 2020, he suggested, he's open to the idea of the 2020 presidential election being rigged by the Democrats. You should condemn Joe Biden for supporting genocide and war crimes. Doesn't mean you give in to Trumpian conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. And also for talking about foreign policy in terms of consistency, I very much opposed any Western military involvement in Syria. That doesn't mean that I turned a blind eye to the horrors unleashed by Assad against Muslim innocent civilians. So I think consistency on human rights internationally, and not giving in to bigoted views about minorities, trans people, I think is a very striking example. So yeah, I think the red line. I don't think it's not easy to come up with these. So it's not a problem or difficult to come up with these red lines. Consistency, which is you stand always against prejudice, against all minorities. You stand up for all minorities, irrespective, and you consistently stand for human rights at home and abroad. I don't think George Galloway's left wing. I know it's going to annoy some people listening to this, but taking a good stand in Gaza, which he has, doesn't in any way, compensate for his views elsewhere. Which is why I think this is important, because we need, independent candidates who are rooted in their community. And at the moment, Galloway's filled that vacuum, hasn't he? He's there because there isn't something like this to help support and fund independent candidates. So I'm hoping, we'll have people, for example, who used to be in the Labour Party, like Jamie Driscoll, and also Leanne Mohammed, who's a British Palestinian woman who's standing against Wes Streeting in Ilford. Andrew Feinstein, who's standing against Keir Starmer himself, who's a former ANC politician and the son of Holocaust survivors. So I think it's very straightforward to come up with those red lines.
But has that been agreed to by the coalition behind We Deserve Better? Has that already been discussed as something that will be stuck to when allocating these funds?
Yes, absolutely. That's something which those who have been involved have all discussed and agreed. There's a huge range of independent and green candidates they're going to be backing. I mean, an obvious one is when Jeremy Corbyn ends up standing, which I think is very likely. He hasn't announced it, but I'd be extremely surprised if he doesn't, given local party members in Islington North have been denied their democratic rights by the party leadership, their right to choose their candidate, and they would overwhelmingly choose Jeremy Corbyn. Diane Abbott, if she's not allowed to stand, she's someone who should be supported if she went on to become an independent candidate, if the Labour Party refused to allow local members in Hackney North and Stoke Newington to vote for that. So it's not, there's no shortage of these candidates. So I think there's a whole range of them, but the coalition would immediately fall apart if Gallowayites, George Galloway type candidates were backed. Of course, the Green Party wouldn't be involved in something like that for a start. I think it's important to have that consistency.
This isn't quite tactical voting, it's more like tactical funding, but you've still been hit by lots of accusations today that you're essentially helping the Tories with this. How do you respond to those?
There is more chance of one of my cats becoming supreme emperor of the universe than the Conservatives winning the next general election. It's not going to happen. The Tories have destroyed themselves. They've self-immolated. Just one of the scandals, I suppose, scandals, euphemistic, that they've been embroiled in would be sufficient to finish off a normal political party. Partygate being one. The worst squeezing living standards on record, collapsing National Health Service and general public realm, just being in power for that long, being intellectually and politically exhausted because they've gone through so many iterations and every single one has failed. But obviously, for me, what clearly destroyed the Conservatives was the Liz Truss experiment. People didn't like her policies. They objected to them overwhelmingly. And they objectionable policies crashed the economy and sent rents and mortgages spiking. And after that, the electorate decided it doesn't matter what you say or do. We're not listening and we're not going to vote for you anymore. That was the end of the Conservative rule, which is why now in the latest poll, they're looking like they're going to get overtaken by Reform. Even if they claw back some support, given an election is likely in either October or November, in fact, inevitable in October, November, and we're now in March, there is no way in hell they could possibly win. And you're right, if this was a close run election, I don't think something like this would be seen as possible because too many people would go, ooh, look, Owen, and not just Owen, people from my perspective see where you're coming from. Don't like these guys either, but we've got to get the Conservatives out. So the reassurance, what the tagline of the campaign is, the Tories are toast. Let's send Labour a message. If you vote Green or Independent, you're not going to let the Conservatives win another term in office. There's absolutely no chance of that happening. And the really fundamental point is, you are going to be spooked into thinking that by Labour and their client journalists, but they don't believe it. The reason they're saying it is because they want the absolute power of an overwhelming majority. And you've seen how they behave with a dissent in their own party. They have very cynically and factionally used, for example, the issues of racism, where they protect those who support Keir Starmer, who make anti-Semitic remarks, and then cynically, for example, purge the likes of left-wing Kate Osamore, one of the only black female Labour MPs, for saying what's happening in Gaza is genocide on the day the International Court of Justice puts Israel on trial for alleged genocide. We saw what they did to the Speaker the other week. Their own people certainly briefed BBC Newsnight's political editor that the Speaker had crushed the SNP's collective punishment, its motion saying Israel was responsible for collective punishment, because he'd been told that the Labour wouldn't let him become Speaker again if they get a majority, which they will. You can't trust them with that power. These people are power mad. They're authoritarian. They're intolerant of dissent. And the only reason they're trying to spook people into thinking the Tories will win, which they absolutely know there's no chance of happening whatsoever, is because they just crave a massive majority. And believe you me, they will use that majority to use this machinery of state for factional revenge. That's the sort of people they are. They will clamp down on the right to protest. They will find ways of using the state to come down hard on anything associated with the left.
5 years ago, we were pleading with various centre-right figures to stop writing op-eds about why they were leaving the Labour Party and why Jeremy Corbyn and his front bench were the worst things that could ever possibly happen to this country. Is We Deserve Better a continuation of that cycle from faction to faction, or is it an attempt to break it?
I think the very clear difference is those on the right of the Labour Party are, I think, the most effective cry bullies in British political history, in that they spent years going, oh, Jeremy Corbyn's the next coming of Stalin, look how totalitarian and intolerant he is, he's crushing us. He did no such thing. Obviously, he started with the shadow cabinet packed full of people who opposed him, and then they resigned en masse. And then he continually appointed people from the whole length and breadth of the Labour Party, including Keir Starmer, who was the shadow Brexit secretary. So he put people in place who he knew didn't support him from all wings of the Labour Party. Now, I think a lot of people would say he was too lenient. I think in hindsight, that's what people would argue, wouldn't they? He didn't purge a single MP. Not a single MP got deselected as Jeremy Corbyn. You had for months, and I remember because I had to keep going on television about it, a national news story which was seen as like a national scandal about a few councillors getting deselected in Haringey. So the point I'm making is there was no reign of terror under Jeremy Corbyn. Actually, it was a broad church, and they were allowed to constantly attack and brief him with no action of any description taken against them. This, on the other hand, is the most authoritarian leadership in the history of the Labour Party. Don't listen to me. Listen to John Cruddas, who is a MP from the middle of the party, who used to be an advisor to Tony Blair, and he said this is the most illiberal faction in the Labour Party's history in charge, and they want to power. They're obviously, they have the most authoritarian leadership in history. So I think the point I'm making is, I've supported Labour in the past when they've done terrible things. People have completely correctly just go, well, why are you backing Labour then under X, Y, or Z then when they're doing terrible things? Because the difference is now, firstly, the nature of the crisis enveloping Britain in terms of austerity, they're going to continue that. That, in my view, means the far right are going to stand to benefit. So unless we do something now, given Labour are going to continue those policies, the far right will end up benefiting. So we have to do it whether we like it or not. That's my own view. But the other is there's no way back as things stand without external pressure. If people think Labour might change in the future, which is, I think, is a legitimate perspective, it'll only happen with external pressure. Otherwise, they will just purge everybody on the left, which is what they're doing. They're making it a hostile environment for anyone to the left of Peter Mandelson.
Where can people find out more about We Deserve Better?
Go to wedeservebetter.uk. And it's really simple at the moment. What you do is you donate whatever money you want, you can. And there's a cost of living crisis. It's only if people can. And that money will then go to the likes of Leanne Mohammed, who's standing in Ilford against Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary who boasts of how he's going to increase privatisation of the National Health Service. Or it will go to, for example, Carla Denyer, brilliant Green candidate, standing against Stangham Debonair in Bristol Central, with polling suggesting she could win. Well, with more funding, I'm sure that makes it more likely. Jamie Driscoll, former Labour mayor of North Tyne, now standing for the North East Combined Authority. His election's in May. He needs all the support he can get. So all you do is you just either donate, if you can, at the very least, put in your details, because the other part of this is to get people to go in, if they're nearby, put your details, and then people can be sent information about how you can campaign, how you can, give up some time, knock on doors if you're able to do so. It's really simple at the moment, and I think we'll see what happens when Starmer's in power. I see this as a trial run myself. It's laying foundations. It's limited in terms of what you can achieve with an election so close. But there's all these brilliant candidates now, and you don't have to choose between the Green Party or the Independents. You can just give some money, and it will be apportioned to candidates. You won't agree with them on everything, but you'll agree with them a lot more than you agree with the Labour leadership. And it'll put pressure on Labour. We've already seen Wes Streeting, obviously quite spooked by the support Liam Mohammed's getting, and that's why he started changing his rhetoric on Gaza. It'll scare them, and it'll put pressure on them. And it just, if it's just £2 or £3, it makes a difference, and it will go to candidates who need it. And as I say, either you put pressure on them, or the hard right of British politics will keep putting pressure on them, and Labour will gladly keep shifting towards them. It's up to us.